Welcome to What's Important to You, a podcast about purpose, passion, and the things that truly matter. I'm James Dean, life coach and host, and each week I sit down with inspiring guests from all walks of life and ask one powerful question: what's important to you? Their stories will spark reflection, fuel your goals, and remind you what really matters, so you can move forward with clarity and momentum. In today's episode, I'm joined by a certified coach and trainer with a passion for helping others reach their goals, build better habits, and live more fulfilling lives. After a successful 25-year corporate career in leadership roles across London and Dublin, he made a bold transition into learning and development and has never looked back. Since then, he has delivered coaching and training to clients across Ireland and the UK, covering everything from leadership and well-being to personal growth and performance. He recently completed a master's in positive psychology and coaching, and when he's not working with clients, you might just find him on stage, indulging in his lifelong love of theatre. This is a conversation about change, confidence, and what really means to design a life that fits. Today, we find out what's important to Paul Dicker. Hi, Paul. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, James. It's my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me. Great to be here.
Absolutely. Really looking forward to this.
Me too.
Paul, we're going to dive straight into it with the first question, as always, which is, Paul, what's important to you?
Yeah, well, probably as a lot of your guests say, that's a big question, but it's a great question to ask. And it got me reflecting on one of my walks, or a number of my walks recently. And I think probably if you asked me that a number of years ago, it would have certainly been different. But where I am right now, and what I'm trying to do with my life, is to make it meaningful and purposeful. You know, really making sure that my daily actions align with the kind of person that I want to be. So my values of, kindness, supportive, authentic, and that I am being of service to others through those values. So my meaning and my purpose, being in service to others, helping and supporting them, particularly, James, in these times that we live in, as we all know, very volatile, uncertain, sort of stressful times. That's kind of what I came to when I originally thought of your question. I actually say originally, it kind of morphed a few times, but that's where I've settled on. So those are the things that are really important.
Love it. And it's that thing of meaning. Is one thing is saying having meaning and purpose, but it's also what that actually means itself, the purpose. So when you say about serving others, where did that, I suppose, come from?
Yeah, that's a good question, because you're right. Meaning and purpose, I'd say a lot of people would say that's definitely what they want and that's important. But what does that translate to? So it means that every day I am interacting with people on a level where I'm being kind, I'm being supportive, I'm encouraging, I'm helping them to develop. And it comes from a place really where as a trainer, as a mentor, as a coach, my work means that I'm engaging regularly with lots of different people in lots of different places, a whole sort of smorgasbord of difference, where I have an opportunity to interact with them. So, and one of my core things that goes through my head, James, is that when I'm meeting and interacting with people, that I'd like through our interactions that I leave them feeling just a little bit better by the time we finish that conversation, that course, that coaching session. Maybe they feel a bit more inspired, a bit more motivated, a bit more listened to. But it's just that I hope that through that interaction, the meaning and purpose comes through in that action of, really lining up everything so that they go away from our interactions, feeling better about themselves, maybe having some sort of plan or action. And if I can do that, frequently, hopefully most of the time, one never knows quite. Sometimes these things, you don't see it immediately and people tell you later on, that you made a difference. So that's really where I'm heading to with this. And you asked there, where does it come from? I mean, again, that's kind of really, that question just asked there makes me reflect just about life in general for me. I've always had a passion for self-development and personal development, James, right? In my, so my own interest has been about how can I get better at life? I think in the past it was like, how can I be perfect at life? And I've realized, of course, that's not possible. And in fact, the imperfection is all part of the beauty. But I've had that interest of really sort of personal development, learning life's lessons in myself. So I've done a lot of work on myself in that. And now I'm at a stage in my career and my age and that part of my life where I want to give back all the things that I've learned and carry on developing myself as well. So I can do that in the best authentic way. I mean, I think actually,
Yeah,
James,
I love it. Yeah.
yeah, I'll give you a story actually. Again, I'm reflecting on your questions before this. It took me back to when I was probably about 20. I stood in a bookshop in High Holborn in London. I was working in a bank at the time, and I was there to buy a banking book, on something like financial regulations or something like that. I had enough disposable income to buy that book at the end of the month. And then I walked past self-development or personal development, and there was a book there by a guy called Norman Vincent Peale called The Power of Positive Thinking. And I thought, that looks interesting. I remember standing in that bookshop, sort of leafing through it for half an hour, and then thought, well, I better buy it now. So I walked out with that and didn't pick up the banking book at that time. Anyway, I had to go back and buy it later. But that kind of started me on a journey. That book, I mean, from all those years ago. I'm an avid and always have been avid in that arena, but my work hasn't always aligned with that. And I think I'll probably talk about that too, with you. It's only now my work aligns
Yeah.
more with that.
Yeah. No, that's an interesting because it's like so many people I've spoken to who kind of are in this sort of overall world, if we want to talk about it, within personal development, well-being, coaching, all this sort of everyone has a sort of different and individual journey towards it. And
Yes.
so it's like I'd love to know. I remember to come back to something or one of our first interactions ourselves, and I'll reflect on that in a moment. But like, what was that? You said you were working in financials, so and then you picked up that book. What was then the journey that took you into that world itself?
Yeah. Well, as you say, yeah, banking finance was my world for, up until sort of my mid to late 30s. I worked in banking in the city in London. And then when I moved over to Ireland, my wife's Irish, Kira. Better give her a mention on this, James. My lovely wife, Kira. We moved back over here 25 years ago, and I worked in banking then as well. And actually, I can still recall the day I got a pivotal phone call from my boss at the time who spotted something in me, probably around this development piece. I did work on myself. And he said, Paul, I'd like you to become a coach for some of our sales guys and girls, and I thought, well, what's one of those? And basically it's like, you start Monday. So, I mean, it was very exciting. I mean, but I was kind of thrown into this. I mean, with his support, because he was fantastic, to be honest. But it just kind of, I went and studied coaching then. I did a coaching diploma for a year. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is really leaning into the values because actually the timing of that call, James, was, I think, really important. I'd started to become less enthused in the world of financial services. I wasn't as motivated. We all go through peaks and troughs, but it had been kind of over a period of time. And there was a voice in my head that said, Paul, you need to be doing something else. So that call came at the right time, and so I started down that journey, James. And I then went into sales coaching. I loved that. I actually then got a promotion to sales manager, which I enjoyed. I could use some of the coaching, but I wasn't in it as much as I wanted to. So after a few years, I decided, right, I'm going to go for it. So in the middle of sort of the financial crash, Paul here decides to take a leap, So it just so happened that when I took the leap, it was kind of on one of the worst days financially back in whatever it was, 2008. But I did anyway, and I joined a large multinational consulting firm and worked in their learning function and started delivering courses on leadership, personal effectiveness. And I just thought, oh my goodness, I'm now really lined up. I mean, I should say that and this is a good learning for me, and maybe for your viewers and listeners, maybe they'll consider as well. Once I decided that I wanted to move on and really fully commit to going to learning and development, I started reaching out. right? I thought, who's doing this already? So, and some of them were people I knew, vicariously, not closely, but I got in touch. I had coffees. I laid the seeds. I attended. I remember going to networking events where everyone else was doing that job apart from me. But I wanted to be in the room
Yeah.
where they were. And because of that, I made connections. And then, funnily enough, things started to align. I got a call one day, Paul, there's a vacancy. Come in for an interview. And that was about a year after I made the decision. There was a full year, James, where I did all those little
Yeah.
things. There were small steps
Yeah.
every day. And that was a big life lesson for me. You almost have to
Yeah.
start doing the thing and mixing with the people. That was key for me.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's a great point to think to sort of, as opposed to waiting it for it to happen, you kind of, it's
Yeah.
what's within your control at any given moment.
Yeah. Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, we've spoken about this in the past, James, but how important it is. I know your focus is on this as well, to lean into what you can influence and what you're unable to. So I've always sort of learned that, what can I do? What is a small step that I can take that will take me down that path? I may not have all the answers, and that path changed along the way. Sometimes we look to see the end destination, but really, I couldn't really picture that. All I could see was what's in front of me, and then it starts to become a
Mm.
path towards that, and it changes, and of course, and in fact, it wasn't ideal either, because that first, I was engaged to be a trainer for credit courses because my background was banking and finance, so it
Yeah.
wasn't about leadership or personal development. But I was now in the room, I
Yeah.
was now in the organization, so I said, okay, I can do this. It's not ideal for me, but I'm meeting people,
Yeah.
I'm using the skill. I'm learning how to be a good facilitator rather than trainer and coach. And I did that for about 6, 7 months. And then just so happened that my boss at the time, somebody else that was really influential, said, Paul, how about you move over to start doing some leadership stuff? So that took me away onto that path. So I think what I'd say to people is, you won't get exactly what you wish for, but get in the room where it happens, get in the place, and that certainly, worked for me. Sometimes there were 2 steps back and 1 step forward, and that's fine. It's not one-way traffic, as you know, James.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, no, it is a massive uh, lesson, because I think there's a lot of times when if it doesn't happen either straight away or happen in the way that we may have envisaged, we
Yeah.
think, well, that's it then. And as
Yes.
opposed to thinking, well, as you say, you're in the room, there's opportunities. Is because even in that sort of sense of those first ones you were saying, it's more to do with still the financial services, what you're training about, versus the leadership stuff. As you say, there were still learnings you could take from being a trainer, being a facilitator, so you're still
Loads of
learning
them.
all the time. Yeah.
Yeah. No, you absolutely. And I sort of honed my craft. The subject matter was not the one that was the inspirational piece, but so you're right, James, but the skills were. And I had wonderful colleagues. I mean, it was a wonderful time.
Yes.
People really supporting me. I was learning things from them, the way they trained, facilitated, overcome challenges in the classroom, whatever it might be. And so you're right. It was a melting pot of learning, a steep learning curve. And I think what you said there, is absolutely key. That I think sometimes we can get dispirited early on if we don't get what we want straight away. And in my life, what I've learned is actually some of the best stuff takes a bit longer. And in fact, most of the best stuff, and most of the best stuff that I've came to has been after going through a few hurdles, disappointment. Actually, James, I remember, and this has only just come back to me, but I remember going for a job with another company for a training job, and I didn't get it. And this is before that sort of shift, where
Yeah.
eventually it ended up. And I remember feeling dispirited at the time, and I thought, well, what can I learn from this? Why didn't I succeed? Maybe it was my interview, maybe it was something about the experience, whatever. But it was learning. So
Yeah.
you have to look at yourself in the mirror and say, I'm not perfect. I'm going to learn from this, and what can I now do to repivot? So
Yeah,
yeah, that
absolutely.
is key. Sorry, James.
Yeah, well, I want to. No, you're right. I wanted to close the loop that I said earlier, in the sense of our first sort of how we first sort of crossed paths, because it is that thing of, like, I remember coming to a course, a facilitation course that you're doing when I was in my previous sort of life within financial services as well, and coming to one of the leadership courses that I think was one of the day courses that you delivered. And I think it was yourself, and then I was on another one there. There was I don't know if you can remember, if I can remember his full name. His name was Garode, I think. He was another sort of
Yes,
coach
very dear
who
friend
kind
of
of,
mine,
he
a
helped us.
very good friend of mine.
Yeah, and I think, yeah, this is going back a good number of years now, probably similar around that time of that sort of crash, 2009-10 thing when I was in there. So it's a good few years ago now. And I remember it was yourself and Garode who first got me sort of intrigued and interested in coaching, because I'd never heard of the
Really?
term a coach in that respect
Okay.
before.
Yeah.
To finish the story in that sense of the 2 hour, I was like, and I looked about it then, but I didn't go back to it for another 10 years almost. Do you know what I mean? It's amazing, like, in the sense of how
Yes.
it stuck with me, and the sort of remuneration thing. And then I think there's a little bit of what you said there. And sometimes we think we need it straight away. Sometimes we might not be ready for it either. We
True.
might need to
Yeah.
grow or develop or grow into something, like,
Yeah.
and I think that sometimes it's like we need to just sort of reignite it or whatever, and that, like,
Yeah.
and we can always come back to something. And I think
Yeah.
that's what sometimes puts people off, that they can come back. You can always come back to something.
Yes. You absolutely can. And it's great to hear that story, James. I wasn't aware of that. But, obviously remember the times that you're in the training room, but as you say, a seed was sown, and it can take, 10 years before you actually see yourself doing that thing. But over that time, in the unconscious, things are going on, things are lining up. It may not be as quick and as fast as you hope. And I think sometimes as well in our business, that life experience helps us, doesn't it? That bit of life experience to be able to be credible and authentic as coaches and trainers and facilitators. But it's interesting you mentioned Garode, because again, when I made a transition, and you asked about transitions, one of the biggest sort of transitions I made was 10 years ago to go out on my own. I mean, why would I do that?
Mm.
I was absolutely in my element. I was working in an organization that was very supportive. Colleagues were fabulous, working with great participants like your good self, for great clients. But again, I just started getting that little nudge to say, yeah, maybe how about going out on your own and doing this? And that little voice was saying, well, Paul, why would you do that? You got your pension, you got job security, So, but I made that decision, and a few people were already out on their own doing it, like Road, for example, and a few others that I started talking to about it. So again, talking to, getting encouragement from people, that were already doing what I wanted to do. And the reason, why did I want to make that leap? Again, it was probably about values. Comes back to values, because it was
Okay.
about, I wanted a bit more autonomy. I wanted to reach out to sort of a wider sort of, different industries, different sectors. At the time I was stuck with one sector, and that was my background, my experience. So I wanted to broaden that, and just to kind of have a little bit more autonomy about some of the stuff that I was doing. So that was the key driver. And I took that sort of leap of faith, and there I was, 10 years ago, almost to the day that I went out on my own. Now, and I would say, James, I think I'm not really a big risk taker, in the sense of just go with things and, jump and the parachute will appear. I mean, I've heard that one, but I want to check the parachute first. I lined up. I think in my banking background, I've become very good at sort of analysing risk and making, as much as I can, eliminating the downside. So there were a few things I put in place financially to ensure that if it didn't work out, it wouldn't be the world's worst. And I think that's always been my attitude to taking risks. Definitely the best things in life have meant that I've taken some degree of risk. I mean, moving to Ireland with my wife, a new country, like yourself, I think, you had that big life change as well, didn't you, James?
Yeah,
So,
indeed.
that taking that sort of leap of faith, that was the best thing I could have ever done in my life. Changing careers, going self-employed, they involved some level of risk. It's sort of limit the downside, do a bit of research, and then you jump, and then hopefully the parachute opens, So
Yeah.
but I guess you know what I'm speaking to
Love it.
with changes, because you've
Yeah.
done similar things to me in that sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's yeah, the it's an interesting one actually as well, because when I was chatting to someone else about this, in a sense of even the moving country and that, and I was talking about, and maybe you can talk about this a little bit as well in relation to the people you've worked with or groups
Yeah,
you've done facilitation with, is how people can sometimes minimize the innate sort of skills or things they have because of their experiences. So as
yeah,
you say, like, I've moved country of where I've lived different parts of the world. I'm from all over. I was born in Germany, grew up on a military base. I've had this sort of lived in the UK for a few years, only for a couple of years, and I moved to Ireland. So I have all these. So I'm very comfortable in wherever I am. It's just because there's this sort of like where I am is if where it's like I'm the cliche of wherever I hang my hat, literally. And as
yes,
you were mentioning before the chat, it's like, so I'll be
yeah.
home. Like, so I kind of, I can very much adapt to my surroundings, I suppose,
That's
quite sort of
great.
easily.
The key skill.
Whereas where there's people who, whereas there's people who would, going into the neighboring county would
Yeah,
be a
yeah,
massive sort of
yeah,
thing. So that is one
yeah,
thing for me that I find that I kind of, because it's just a part of me, I almost don't even
yeah.
recognize it. Do you know what I mean?
Yes. No, it's
So I
true.
suppose,
Yeah.
have you found that when you're working with people that you kind of go, when you're chatting to them, that you go, they're undervaluing themselves almost?
Oh, without a doubt. Without a doubt. I mean, we both lean into strengths with our work. And I think, James, that
Yes.
certainly, I mean, for one of my courses in particular, even last week, I had a group of maybe 15 people, and they came up and I got them to talk about what their strengths were, and how they get to use them. And they kind of almost feel a bit embarrassed that it feels like gloating. It feels like bragging. And actually, a lot of the time you talk about what's your key strength, they'll often say to me in coaching, oh, well, everyone can do that. Well, you'd be surprised. In fact, most people won't be able to do that, not the way you do it. So I do think we take our strengths for granted. We think they're just because they're easy, because they're natural gifts and talents. We sort of maybe don't
Yes.
don't value them as much. We think we have to go through pain and effort. I mean, of course, we have to look at our weaknesses too. We all do. But I do think a narrative around change is geared towards a lot of time fixing. But what about using the natural gifts, talents, and strengths? I mean, one of the things that I found in my master's in positive psychology and coaching that I did recently was about leaning into strengths finders, and we did a few assignments on this. So seeing those people last week standing up with their post-it saying, "This is my strength," and then people saying to them, "I get that," and then giving them feedback. That's how you use that strength. That's how you use that strength. And they all gave themselves a lovely round of applause at the end of it. But definitely,
Yeah.
definitely, I think you're right, James. There's a theme of almost undervaluing those natural gifts and talents. And so I hope that, through the work I do and other work you do, that we bring awareness to those and then that usage of them,
Absolutely.
you know. Um,
Yeah, absolutely. And absolutely. And I think it's really interesting when you say that, the whole thing of when you asking a group of people, just the whole thing of, even though it's that cliche of interview question, your strengths and things, and
yeah,
versus having the cliche answer, to
yeah,
actually genuinely, when you actually really get people, no, I want the genuine, not that you're honest and kind and all that, you know
no,
what I mean? The sort of
yeah,
stock, give me the genuine,
yes,
how that sort of, I don't want to feel big headed. All these sort of
yeah,
things we've been told over our lives.
yeah,
So we can't be,
yeah,
and it's like, well, you're allowed to be confident. You're allowed to be, there's no permission needed to sort of, because in that same sense, if someone's come to you for coaching or come to you that is to sort of get the best out of themselves, it's the ability for someone to recognize themselves in that way that's going to help them move forward. And
without
what
a
I'm really
doubt.
interested, because the amount of people that you've seen and worked with over the years, this is a question I'm really interested. When you even in that room last week, do you actually can you see like almost like the physical change in a person when they actually kind of really own it?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, if I think back to that exercise last week, I mean, they're standing at a flip chart there. You can see as they're talking about it, the passion starts to increase when they can look around the room and people are listening to them. and being motivated by them. So you can almost see them sort of, standing a bit straighter, certainly vocally and posture. When they're talking about those things, people come to life. I mean, often during coaching, that's a sign, isn't it? As James, as well as I do, that when you see the voice change, the body change, you can pick up this is something that's important to them, or this is something they're passionate about. So I certainly see that. I mean, I get to see them in that moment. With a lot of my work, sometimes there's follow-up
Yeah.
workshops. I do one-to-one coaching, but a lot of people I'm meeting and saying goodbye to in the same day. Maybe we'll cross paths again, maybe we won't. So one of the key things that I say to them is, look, I can influence what happens in the room. You have to influence what happens out there, but I'm going to help you. And I want you to name the action. So I get them to say, what's the specific action that is going to lean into that strength? So if their strength is, let's say, bringing people together, or motivating, rather than saying, I'm going to bring people together when I leave here, or I'm going to be more motivational, I say, well, what does that look like on a daily basis? So being more motivational might be, well, I'll have, conversations with my team. I'll have a one-to-one with the people that I'm working with. So I get them to translate what they're saying into something specific. Right, you see those changes and then you ask for the commitment. What's the commitment? I mean, there's a couple of things, James, as well, because
Yes.
I can't remember what the phrase you used was there, but what I heard was in what you said was, and it's really important, is that we're not into the game of judging people in this, or the business of judging people, and it can sometimes, when you're trying to get people to change or use things, it might feel like, is there a judgment there? I think people are trying the best they can in life, and this leans into my values of trying to give people the benefit of the doubt and being kind. It's messy, it's complicated. People are doing the best they can, but sometimes they don't get the opportunity to think about these things. So, these things are just observations. They're just observations. And I think it's important for people to hear. In every workshop, when I open it, I'm talking about, this is a place where we can feel safe, where we're going to lean into stuff that we're doing well, but also things that aren't going so well. And there's no judgment here. We're all doing the best we can. We all mess up, including yours truly. But I think what
Yeah.
I've learned
No,
is,
absolutely. I love that because it
that reflecting on those things that
it
go wrong,
reminds
that's
me
key. And I might talk
of
about that a little bit
the
later,
work
because I
of
think it's a key skill,
Brené
reflection,
Brown.
that often isn't.
She did
Yeah.
some work. She did some work on on that very question where there was some research where they were asking people, do you think people are doing their best? There's the interesting, and just to answer the question, do you think people are trying their best, whether it be yes or no? And then they did a few sort of follow-up research on the people, depending on how they answered. And if the people who believed that yes, people are trying to do their best had sort of more positive sort of outcomes and things like that, it just
Yes.
framed themselves that bit better. So it's that, I think there's
Yeah.
that element of, if we're encouraging people and enabling people, allow them to try and to be their best, it will bring the
Yeah.
best out of them. It is that sort of
Definitely.
full circle in that.
Yeah.
The next one I
Yeah.
wanted
Definitely.
to know about, because in relation to your sort of doing, you still, just to clarify, do you still do the sort of facilitation side of stuff, or is it more just one-to-one? Do you still do a bit of both?
Oh, most of it is facilitation. I'd say 90% of my work, I'm in
Yeah.
a room somewhere
Okay.
with groups. I mean, most of it is in
Brilliant.
Ireland these days, occasionally over in the UK, once or twice a month, over in the UK. But predominantly I'm here in Ireland, and you'll find me in a room with a group of maybe 15 to 20 participants across a broad range of different sectors, sometimes working with leadership groups, sometimes working with first-time managers, other times just, working with individuals. So, I'll do things around, how they make an impact, present themselves, those kind of workshops, which are open to everybody. So it's a bit of a mix, to be honest with you. I think one of the things I've learned, actually, James, is to be better at sort of, I think you mentioned it in our pre-chat, getting to know what is it I do and what don't I do. So I become more focused. So there's some
Yeah.
courses now that I've kind of let go and just said, right, these are my core. These are my core. Principally, my core are sort of leadership programs, and also some of those personal effectiveness type. One of my core ones, actually, probably my most requested these days, is a workshop called Insights Discovery. So this is a bit of a plug, James.
Yep.
You know, I've got my
Yep.
blocks to hand. We get to play
Good.
with colours. You probably you may have seen these. This is a great one now. And
Yes.
so on a lot of my time, have you seen these before? These colour blocks. I mean, I
Yeah, I've
love
done
doing.
it. I've done it. Yeah.
You've done Insights. Okay. Do you remember your colours, James?
Yeah, I was and top from the top it was I went green,
Yeah.
blue, yellow,
Yeah.
red.
Very good. Yeah. So we're slightly different, you know. I'm yellow, green, blue, then red. For your viewers who don't know what we're talking about, they have to sign up for a workshop with me. But it's one of my.
Yeah.
I love doing it. I love doing it because it's about basically finding out what's your personality type. You fill in an evaluator, takes 15 minutes. And time again, as you probably know, you get a profile, you read it, and people say to me, my goodness, has someone been following me around for the last week? How do they know this about me? So there's a great accuracy in finding out about self, strengths, as you were saying, weaknesses, communication preferences. And so a lot of times I get
Yeah.
a team in a room. So I do a lot. We have a big colourful wheel. I bring teams in. So, you know, they get to understand each other, where we are on the wheel, who's similar, who's different, how to adapt our communication styles. So it's a great one-day workshop. And I think in these times, certainly since COVID, it's my main thing that I do now, because I think a lot of teams are looking for opportunities to get in a room together, because a lot of them are working hybrid. So, Paul, can we purposely get in
Yes.
a room and talk about communication and collaboration, because we're finding it a little bit more difficult? So, and that's very interactive. And again, what it does, you asked about, am I doing facilitation or one-to-one coaching? The coaching I'm doing very often is on the back of those insights, where I do a one-to-one sometimes with the individuals post-workshop. Sometimes I just like, you know, a couple of times this week, I've had people that have done the profile and just want a bit of coaching. So my coaching a lot of the times these days is driven off the back of Insights Discovery. Big plug for them today, isn't it? But you know, has been that.
Yeah.
I use coaching skills in the room. So, you know, I'm not. It's
Yes.
funny because I think we call ourselves trainers sometimes, but I'm more of a facilitator and coach in the room, because I'm not showing loads of slides. You know, it's interactive. So that's kind of where I am. I think as I journey on,
Love it.
maybe more of the one-to-one stuff will come in, you know, sort of as my energy levels
Mm.
may wane and bouncing around the room. I may like the odd day where I'm just sitting on sitting there with somebody and doing a few of those. So that's something I'm considering at the moment. But I love being around
Yeah.
people, James. I'm
For
an
those,
extrovert, as you know.
yeah. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. But it's funny though, because the people, if people have done insights discovery, and it is a really interesting one, and the colors all mean different things. I would have probably bet my house that you would come up yellow on top there, Paul, because it's like, you know, in a sense, and it very much in a sense of comes that value you said of kindness and that sort of, you know. So for anyone who's done it, they'll probably laugh. But people who haven't, they'll be like, "What's he talking about? He was yellow." You know, it's a very good one.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and likewise with you, James, the green, leading with green, you know, because that empathy, that caring, that understanding, it's a great color to lead with as a coach as well, because you're a very good listener and you have a sort of that intuition that comes through green. I mean, the thing is, of course, as I'll say, we're all four colors, you know, but it's which is your highest, which is your lowest, and how can you use
Yes,
your highest? How can you use your highest as a strength? But where does the lowest one maybe, you know, work against you sometimes?
and now
Yeah.
that you're coming up to 10 years, which is a fantastic sort of achievement. What would, because there'll be plenty of people on this who maybe listen to this, or maybe either thinking either that sort of transition, or even career transition, or the whole thing of going on their own.
Yeah.
Any sort of real learnings would you say from those 10 years?
Okay, so for being out on my own, okay, definitely. I think when you go out on your own, there's a temptation to say yes to everything. Hey, I'm busy, you know. So
Mm,
I think one of the, I mean, I can remember being in rooms early on thinking this is not the subject material that really lights my fire, and that may come across to the audience, or the audience themselves, I'm not sure it's the right grouping for me, it might be for somebody else. So I kind of had that first year of trying things. I said to myself in the first year, to be honest, let's say yes to everything, let's learn some of the stuff, the sectors that I want to be in, so I pared down. I'm a little bit of a people pleaser, and it always has been something in my trait that, I've kind of wanted to be sort of, helpful and supportive, but sometimes those values can tilt over. So I've said yes too quickly to things. Sometimes I've got definitely better at that. And really I've done a lot of work on that. But certainly in the last few years, I'm much better at saying no. I always say with a no, it's a polite no, it's a fair no. It may be a no with a little bit of an explanation. That's how I like to say no. But I've never had anybody, it hasn't ruined a relationship with somebody when I've said no. I've just kind of realized it's not good for me and maybe therefore not good for them. So it allows me to say yes to the stuff that I really want to do. So that's one of the big learnings about going out my own. Think, really, I have all the paraphernalia, I remember, getting all the business cards and all that. I mean, who has business cards these days? But that was 10 years ago. Getting the website, all that stuff is important because people will search for you and look you up if they're thinking about you. But most of my business is word of mouth. It's connection. So I've learned that that's important to keep connected. Social media, of course, with our business has become even more important just to remain visible so people don't forget you. I think that's certainly important, James, in terms of where I get the business from. And I think carve out time for your own professional development still, because so like my journey at the moment is really using AI well, good use of AI. How can I bring that into my business? What are some of the themes that are changing, in terms of personal development and coaching? So leaning into that. So carving out time for that's important for me. So an ideal week for me now, James, would have maybe a few days where I'm on my feet delivering, and probably a couple of days where I do the bit around business development, but also upskilling myself and keeping relevant. I probably need. Do you know what, James? As you asked that question, one thing that's going on, I probably need to outsource a bit more as well sometimes. Like as I mentioned to you before we went and clicked the record button. There's certain things that I'm good at and certain things I'm not as good at, and probably I should trust a little bit to say, give that to somebody else. They can do that, and I can then, do the stuff that I'm good at. So that's probably something. I don't know whether do you outsource anything. You tend to do it all yourself because you know what it's like.
I tend to, yeah. I know it's a really good point in that, like, and some all of the lessons there that are really important. I think it's like the outsourcing thing is one thing I've looked at before and stuff, and even say like for this in the sense of the podcast and stuff of people more sort of like, do I? Because when I first started this a couple of years ago, I was doing all of the editing and things and stuff, and that it can be quite time consuming. I think I could just get someone to do that for me, just send them the files and they could do everything and do it that way. But I suppose then there's the element of, once you have something, you want to keep hold of it and stuff like that. And maybe there's a bit too much of that.
Yeah.
But then I think just as you mentioned it there a second ago, like the advancements of AI, like even just in the 2 years, to give the podcast an example, the technology advancements in sense of what you can do post-production now compared to when I even started it just 2 years ago is so far beyond. There's like, in some ways it's like, a couple of click of the buttons, I don't necessarily need that person. The thing, the sort of, if I was to look ahead and think, it'd be great if for someone to sort of manage and automate some of the stuff and it's like things on social media and things like that, that'd be great. But I think there's an element of kind of what you said earlier, a little bit of this is almost like where I am on the journey. You know what I mean? Sometimes I kind of think, and that little bit of because there's even it's funny. Like I'll give you an own thing. Like I had a website for a long time, and
Yeah.
but I was kind of, and again, I was trying to do it myself, and I was dipping in and out, and I wasn't really using it. It was almost like, oh, because I better have a website type thing. And I was like, is anyone actually going to this website, barring me,
Yeah.
to update it again
Yeah.
randomly? So I actually decided, you know what, I'm going to just stop for the moment. If I need to come back, so I was like, it was more for me making, like you kind of said, those yes no's decisions, but for myself, what am I and as you say, paring it back,
Yes.
what's going back to the question of the
Yeah.
show, what's the most
What's
important
important?
thing, not the
Yeah.
what exactly, and is it
Yes.
again to then focus on the exact things that I think that I are helpful, but I think the point, and this will hopefully resonate with you because obviously it's what you do, but it's again, it's like, what is the people that I am trying to serve and help? What do they need from
Uh,
me
well,
versus what
definitely.
do I want to show them?
Yeah. Well, that's critical, isn't it? I mean, as you were talking there,
Because
I scribbled down the word value because you're absolutely right. I mean, that's where the conversation starts with. What problem am I trying to solve, or help them solve? Where can I add value? What would happen if they didn't use me? You
yeah,
know, so where am I coming in here?
yes,
How can I be in service to them? And I think
yeah,
that is key when you're in business. You have to be thinking, well, what's the problem that I'm solving for my client, or the
yeah,
individual, well,
yeah,
client, individual
yeah,
or groups or otherwise. Yeah,
yeah.
I think,
Because
James.
otherwise, are you just there just to sort of? Sorry, you're just there to sort of show yourself. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
You're
no,
there just
exactly.
to.
Yeah,
It's an ego thing.
and that will soon come across. Um, and that's why, to build the trust, you really need to get in early with your clients around, what's the difference you're going to make? What's the problem that you're going to solve for them? And the unique way that you're going
Yeah,
to do that. Often we talk about, we need to be different to the competition, but we don't need to be
yeah,
vast. I mean, there's a lot of people in this field, right? There's some core fundamentals, but I think a lot of times the difference comes in being consistent, is in consistently delivering quality. I mean, I think to myself, what do I want my clients to say? Again, as you said, anybody that's thinking about going into working for themselves, ask yourself, what would you like your clients to say about you? I mean, the words that come to mind for me is that I'm reliable, certainly, that I will not let them down, that I'm credible. So I've done my homework. I know about them. I know my subject matter, and that I'm personable, that I have that connection. I like to bring myself in. They know who I am, and of course, what problem am I helping them to solve?
yeah,
So you're right, James. And it was interesting you're talking there about some of the journey you've come in about automation and AI. I mean, I suppose for me now, because things evolve all the time, and again in business, you're never stepping into the same river twice. I'm now looking at AI and
yeah,
thinking, how can I use that just to automate and
yes,
simplify to allow me to do the stuff where I can add
yep,
value? Because no doubt AI will
absolutely,
take some of that stuff away, you know, that people can access learning in various ways. So where do I
yes,
bring that piece that they can't get perhaps from an automated
yes,
offering, you know?
yeah,
And I think that comes from
absolutely,
humanity,
yeah.
doesn't it? The humanity, the
Yeah,
authenticity.
yeah. Because what you were saying there, Paul, about it's a great question. I really I want to repeat that for anyone who missed it there, sense of the whole thing of going into business, or that sort of, it's like, how would you want your clients to describe you? How would you want them to talk about you? It's a
Yeah,
really sort of powerful thing. And reflecting as well what you said about the, in a sense of also the learning from business, in sense of how you get more business, is that whole thing of referrals, because that's how your
yeah,
people are talking about you, because they're
yes.
mentioning you. And I don't know if you know the work of, you met Jerry Duffy.
I've heard of
Um,
Jerry Duffy.
so yeah,
Yes.
yeah. So so I've met, he's down here in Mullingar as well. I've gone to a few of his workshops and presentations and stuff. And I remember having a conversation. He was very kind to give me a few minutes a couple of years ago, and I was kind of starting doing this myself, and just throwing questions at him. And one of the things I remember him saying, and I think it is a reflection of what you said there, is like, whenever you're in a situation with someone, you're in a room with a maybe one to one, or whether you're in
Yeah,
a group, he's like,
mm,
you've got to be memorable, and you've got to
yeah,
give them everything in that moment. They've
yeah,
got to get the best of you in
yes,
that moment. It's
yes,
because you got to make it an experience for them. And as you
Yeah.
say, it's because you say like it could be, he says it's like I could get business that's 5 years later, 10 years later,
Yeah.
whatever, for how long he's been in business, because they
Yeah.
remembered, even like, and I say it was well over 10 years since, probably longer
Yeah.
since I first
Yeah.
interacted with you, but
Yeah.
it's a power to the testament of a person's ability to make an impact.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
like, it's, and because the fact that I remembered you from those years ago, and the fact that you did have such an impact on me personally, again, it goes back to the question, and I'm probably answering this with the question myself, but you know, how much of that was you learning your craft, and how much of it was just being your authentic self?
Yeah. So I think authenticity, and being authentic really creates the connection. I'm lucky that I can, step into a room now and be my authentic self. I say I'm lucky. I've realized that, because I think there have been times, I mean, certainly when I was a leader, and it's a great question, James, because certainly when I first started out as a leader and managing a branch in London, of a bank, I think I tried to portray somebody that had all the answers, that, was perfect, that, was completely resilient. And that was stressful. I was almost putting on that, as we know, social mask to try and be, because I said, they can't see somebody who's flawed. But I realized, and it took me a while to realize this, that it was only when I showed that sort of vulnerability that I didn't have all the answers. In fact, they had the answers. Some of them, definitely most of them better than me. My job wasn't to give all the answers, that I was being more authentic. And I remember just the weight coming off my shoulders, and actually the relationships improving, because people connect with authenticity. So if you can go out there and just be your wonderful, quirky you know, I mean, and just, I think we use the word vulnerability a lot. Obviously, as a leader, I had to show a certain level of confidence. So I wasn't sort of having meltdowns in front of them. But sometimes I
Yeah,
would say to them, do you know what? I'm struggling with this piece, of the change, whatever the change initiative was, folks, and this is what I'm doing to try and help myself. What about you? So that's where connection comes in. I mean, it's great you say that about remembering, over those 10 years, James, and I think hopefully the person that you met there 10 years ago, well, it was just me, I think certainly since I've become, into the learning and development space, all the learning I've done on myself and the work I've done, I can step and be me. But I do think with clients and with the person that I want to be in terms of the business, being me, but consistently doing certain things, being brilliant at the basics. Now, some of those things are not natural to me, because going back to colors, the detail and the planning and all that, I have to work on. It takes energy, but it's those things that build the foundation. So making sure that I dot the I's, cross the T's, consistently doing those difficult things, enables me to have that foundation. That then allows me to be authentic, and trust that I've got everything lined up. I think as well, James, I wrote down a word here, Maya Angelou, what she says about people remember what won't necessarily remember what you did, what you said, but how you made them feel. And I love that, because that speaks to, my clients in my business. How do they feel when they've come away from the room that I've been in with them? How do they feel about letting their teams be in a room with me for a day? They must trust me to be somebody that I can create that space. So feeling is the thing we remember, isn't it? How people made you feel. And actually, a lot of the time I have to dial down my extroversion and dial up what you have, that lovely earth green, just to listen, to create a space. Because if I say this a lot on my courses, if we can be the one person that listened to somebody properly today, even for 5 minutes, that's probably something that they're not going to get from anybody else in their life in this busy, frantic world. So yeah, there's a lot to unpick there with your question, but
no,
hopefully we touched on a few key things there.
absolutely. No, it's so much in it, like, and that sort of the crossovers between the sort of the vulnerability and the confidence. I think sometimes we try and separate all these things when they're all woven together. Really,
Yeah.
they're one and the same in that. But that point that you just said there, the last point you just mentioned there, in a sense of people being heard, not
Mm.
just instead of that listened to, and being
Mm.
genuinely feel like they've being heard, because it could be in I'm sure there's a lot of situations where you're when you're in facilitating a group, especially if it's in leadership type thing, where you'll have you've seen it, every type of personality, from the very much extrovert to the introvert. I'm sure there's been occasions where someone in the group has said something and everyone's gone,
Mhm.
looked at them, well, geez, they've never said anything,
Yeah.
because they've not had that almost opportunity or position to be heard. And when someone does feel like they've been listened to, genuinely
Yeah.
listened to, that's a hugely powerful thing
Yeah.
to see and
Definitely.
witness.
No,
You know,
definitely,
it's huge.
James. And in the business of coaching, as you know, it's about creating that safe space where people feel they can be heard, because a lot of people aren't. And I
Mm.
talk about when someone's talking about something, and talking something through, they're going through the process of behavioral change, because, I talk about the 3 A's of behavioral change. The first is awareness. And, as a coach and a facilitator, what I'm trying to do in that environment is create that awareness. A lot of the time, and again, it's not judgment, it's just life. People are rushing around, busy, 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 not pausing, not stopping, and probably daring not to stop. Because if I stop, I've then
Mm.
got to look at my life and look it in the eye and say, hang on a minute, there's a few things here that aren't really working. So let's just keep busy and keep going. So being able to create a space where people can reflect and become aware. The second A of behavioral change, acceptance, because people can be aware of things, but often say, well, that's not a problem, that's not a problem, and maybe bury it a little bit. So we have to accept a need for change. Why do I need to change? And then the third one is action, of course, taking that
Mm.
action. What's the smallest step? And I'm a great believer, one of my favorite books is Atomic Habits by James Clear. He talks about small daily steps, and I'm a great believer in that. In life change, it's about what are the small things that I'm going to do. I think, James, we talk about awareness. I talk in coaching or workshops. What's the conversation that you haven't had that you've needed to have for the last 2 years, 5 years, 10 years? What's the habit that keeps getting in the way that you want to change? What's the person in your life that, no longer has a place in your life for whatever reason, a friend or a colleague, somebody that's adding negativity rather than positivity? And making those changes and accepting some of those things can be really, really hard and tough. But it's the prelude to change, because change starts with a bit of this discomfort and honesty. So, yes, as you say, James, creating that space and being able to allow them to have that, that's what I hope to give to people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Love it. Now, you just mentioned there the one from Maya Angelou, which is a
Yes.
fabulous quotation.
Yes.
Any other quotes or phrases that you have for me that you'd like to share?
Yes, that wasn't my one that I brought along. I brought
Yeah.
another one for you.
Okay. Brilliant.
And again, it's a popular one, but I think you've probably heard this one before, James. But it's one that really resonates with me, and it's Leonard Cohen's. There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. And I think that speaks to me, because what it's saying is that through the imperfections, we really connect with people. When we know that I've got somebody, a living, breathing human being with all their foibles and habits and imperfections, and I have those too, and we're just trying our best in this life. We're trying our best as we sort of stumble through. That allows the light, that allows healing, that allows acknowledgement, and that allows growth. And at times in my early part of my career, and sometimes in my personal life, I've tried to sort of put the polyfiller over the crack, keep repairing it at all
Mm.
costs. And that takes a huge amount of effort, so not being authentic. The best things really, and the best connections I've made have been when I've had conversations that have allowed that little bit of a crack to show that there's, I'm not perfect, I think, but I'm willing to listen to
Yeah.
you. I'm willing to take your feedback and hopefully be a better person. So yeah, Leonard Cohen, you know, I think the light gets into those
Love it.
places that we often try to hide away in through our busy lives. We hide in the
Yeah.
corner somewhere. The light exposes that. It's
Yeah.
not always comfortable initially, but it's necessary to shine a light sometimes and
Yeah.
allow that light to come through the crack.
Love it. Absolutely. No, love it. And what I love, I've said this a few times when I speak to people on the show. The reason I also leave that question towards the end
Yeah,
is because how often it reflects on what we've discussed and so much like, and,
yeah,
and that sort of, absolutely, that sort of initial sort of thinking of wanting to, that idea of perfection and that, but as you said it so many times, it's like, it's that vulnerability, it's the flawedness, it's the quirkiness, I think is one of the words you used as well. Like, it's, those are the things that bring a richness and an intrigue and a
yeah,
curiosity, and
exactly.
and and almost the thing we talked about earlier about that sort of, the things that people can some, I think this is also as well, when I'm just thinking out loud here, is sometimes we think we see it as ourselves, as our own sort of crack or imperfection, whereas as someone else will see it as our strength, and we're going,
That's
well, I
true.
thought that was, I
That's
thought
true.
that was my weakness, and they go,
Yeah,
what are you talking about? That's you.
yeah,
It's like, and
yes,
allow, and that comes back to that people are being heard, and that or that opportunity to express something without that judgment again, because people then can own it and realize that it actually is a
yeah.
something positive as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You're right, James. And that point about people seeing a strength in that weakness has certainly happened in my life, where people have said,
Mm,
very thing that I love about you, or that's the thing that so, and ultimately, as we go, been on this journey, this conversation, it's made me really think about a few things that, again, coming back to, we're all trying our best. We're not
yeah,
going to get to perfect. I'm just somebody here that hopes to be able to help you along that journey. I'm not perfect either. I've done some work on myself. I've learned a few things, that I can share with you. But you've learned things too. And hopefully, just by listening, you can bring those out. And that's what I'm trying to do for the individual or the group, just to bring somebody on that journey, that offers them that helping hand. And again, that goes back to my value. I think one of the key messages that I say to people, people say to me, what's the biggest life lesson, Paul? And I think there's loads of lessons, but ultimately it comes back to just pausing every week, just to reflect, not to be hard on yourself, but just to stop, just to create a
mm,
boundary. It could be 20 minutes that you capture for your week where you go for a walk, and again, I'm a big lover, like you are, James, of walking and being out in nature. I mean, that, my positive psychology background says a lot about being in green or blue spaces, green, forest, woods, or just getting out where there's a bit of grass, or blue, sea, rivers, canals. So if you can get out, and I make this my sort of daily practice, even on a day it's a bit inclement like today, just to get out for 20 minutes,
mm,
half an hour, just to reflect and just let the thoughts come in. And I say to people, look, unplug. Occasionally I listen to a
yeah,
podcast, but I like the time just to unplug and just to let things come, let the voices and the noise and all of that kind of dissipate, and just let some things come in that life's trying to tell you.
yes,
You don't have to act on it straight away.
yes,
Sometimes
no,
you'll find it can be quite disconcerting, but that's all right. It's just a sort of voice, and it's the start of something. But without reflection, we
yes,
don't get the
absolutely.
awareness. We don't get the awareness otherwise, and
Yeah,
that's so important.
absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely. And yeah, and we mentioned it before the recording to say, for people listening there or watching, where I live, and Paul mentioned before we chatted, we also see some of the videos I put out when I'm walking, and what I'm actually doing is I'm walking my dogs. Everyone just sees me, but
Yeah, great.
I have three Labradors that
Oh, wow.
that they do need a walk as well.
Yeah,
So it's this thing of like, and it, a lot of the times as well, it's like what you say though, it's like I'm getting the thoughts in the moment, I'm getting it in there, and it's almost like it's a way of me capturing a thought or capturing something, and I try and do it in a way that I do it quite sort of without practice and just do
yeah,
it. So I get the thought
yeah,
on camera and done, and then I'm
yeah,
back to the walk, because it's trying to find that moment of, I'm there for the walk, I'm there to walk the dogs and be in the where I am, but also thinking,
yeah,
oh, I want to capture what I'm thinking about because it's coming up at that moment.
yeah,
And Well, the interesting, and then some days I'll just walk the dogs. I won't even think about putting it out. But what the interesting as well, I'd say with people getting out in any sort of nature and that as well, the value of it is like, so I'm a member of gardens that I live near here in Mullingar, Belvedere House and Gardens. I give them a plug. It's a lovely place, but it's like, so I almost do the same walk every time I go in because the
Yeah.
dogs are used to where they go and that.
Yes.
But so even though it's the same walk, it's a different walk every time.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think that's
Mm.
what people can
Correct.
even if you think, oh, I've only got the same place to go, it's like the weather's different, the day's different, the light is different, the
Yeah.
growth in the trees is different, the grass is
Yeah.
different,
Yeah.
the wind is, the
Yeah.
smells, the sounds, because the
Yeah.
different birds are out, so it's like, it's that word again, if you were saying about reset and stuff, it's like, sometimes I think people can kind of, oh, I'm just doing the same thing. You're not. You're a different person when
Yeah.
you're doing it
That's
this
very
time.
true.
It's a different moment. So I don't
Yeah.
think the value of getting outside and going for even a 10-minute walk or whatever, I go for an hour. The power in it is incredible.
No, it really is, James. And again, as you're speaking there, I can see in your wonderful reels that you make on Instagram and your wonderful Instagram, James, that's authentic. It's an authentic voice that comes through. And I think that's what connects because you're not overthinking it. You're just talking.
No,
But,
just saying.
and you're right. I mean, one of the things that I'm passionate about is something called acceptance and commitment therapy. ACT. It's ACT and it's called ACT. And there's a great, the names escape me, but there's a great book if anybody's interested in it called The Liberated Mind by Steve Hayes, Dr. Steve Hayes. And but anyway, I did studies and courses and qualified in this, but it's very much about there's mindfulness within that. And I think you described there walking and observing. This is why I say unplug, just walk, and within ACT we learn to say, what are 5 things that I see around me, and as you say, each day you notice something different. What are 5 things that I hear? So you're tuning into your senses, and when you tune into your senses you are in the moment. It's said that most of our time is spent either catastrophizing about the future or ruminating on the past, and neither of those things make us happy. Again, one of my favorite authors, Eckhart Tolle, The Power of Now,
Yeah.
talks
Yeah.
about being in the present moment, and it's so good for us. And so that's why the walk not only helps us to reflect, and you'll find your mind wandering. Again, never judge yourself. Judgment never helps with change. Just notice when the mind wanders and bring it back to the present. Look around you, observe the things around you. And I love the thing that was taught. It was said, look at things as if you were a 5-year-old, for the first time. The curiosity. And it's amazing that really helped me connect. And you feel relaxed. You got some things coming through your head, and you just feel better as a result of it.
Absolutely. No,
It's a
love
key
it.
practice, James. It's a key practice.
Yeah.
Loads of research.
100%. Absolutely.
Again, with my positive psychology, one thing that I'm really keen to say in psychology, and positive psychology in particular, it's not about dismissing real emotions. It's not about everything's happy.
Yeah.
It's not about forcing happiness or minimizing problems. Why I did that positive psychology masters was I wanted to see the research, the credibility. And there's so much research out there about being out in nature, feeling grateful, all these practices we talk about. There's a lot of good stuff out there, and I can put in your link to some of this stuff, and
Brilliant.
share with people,
Awesome. Love it. The next question I want to make sure that I get to ask you is, so who would you say, Paul, have been the biggest influences for yourself?
Yeah. And again, I thought about this one, James. And again, with self-development and, being a core theme of my life, over the years, I've read a lot of books. I've listened to a lot of podcasts. I think the key sort of influence in that realm was a guy called Stephen Covey. He passed away a few years ago, but he wrote a book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Anybody who knows me will say, "Oh, Paul's talking about that book again." I'm a bit of an evangelist for the 7 Habits, but it was kind of one of those books I picked up early on in Leadenhall Street in London. I remember where I bought it, and it made such an impact on me because it helped me to organize, to prioritize, and to think about relationships. So that's been key for me. And actually, when I was working in the bank, I was going out taking that message as part of my role as a coach around branches. So I love doing that. And that, again, took me into that learning development space. But I think ultimately, the influential people in my life have been people that have been those people that have spotted something in me and pushed me and challenged me a little bit. I've worked with a lot of great bosses, but the ones that I remember and been influential, and the people, they don't necessarily have to be a boss, have been people that have maybe given me that little bit of a push out of my comfort zone, who spotted something and probably thought, do you know what? This is something that I see Paul can do. I may not believe in myself, but they've believed in me. So they've been influential. And I think it reminded me when I'm as a leader, in the early days of leadership, I thought my job was to keep everyone happy and comfortable. But actually, it's the opposite of that. I don't want to push people out of the comfort zone all the time, but actually encourage them just to feel a little bit anxious, step out of the comfort zone, because that's where the confidence comes from. That's where self-esteem rises. So the people, I'm thinking of 3 or 4 people in my life, they've all been people that shared that trait. They've all shared that trait, So that's been pivotal for me.
Love it. Yeah, no, it's a huge one. I love as well the fact of making that distinction, the sort of way of your thinking, to make everyone happy as such. Again, go back almost to that sort of perfectionism sort of ideal without the crack, and that versus the sort of, actually, it's that when you were saying about the comfort zone thing, it's almost like that poke and that prod. It's that, they, as you say, they see it before you see it. And you're kind of going, and then I don't know about you, but whenever you've had those moments, and it is that thing of like, when I've spoken to people about this or talked and various things, and the answer I would sometimes get is when people are on that state of worry or they're not sure, it's like, the belief, oh, it's easy for you. And it puts it on them, because it puts out sort of themselves. It's like minimizes themselves. Well, it'll be too hard for me. And it's like, it's not easy for anyone.
No,
all of this is hard.
Exactly.
Like it's the willingness, to step into the hardness, the willingness for it to all go completely arseways. It's the willingness to that, as you said, that calculated risk. It doesn't mean, as you said earlier, jumping out of the plane without the parachute if you don't, but at some point you have to jump.
You do.
There's a point though, if you want the experiences, it's taking that poke and the prod where it's there. So it's I love that how that has pushed you to get to where you are.
Yeah, definitely. And there's no way I've got it all sussed either, but I've certainly learned
100%.
Do you know what I mean? And I won't ever get it all sussed, but I know certain truths. And it's what you say, James. I know the truth is that the best things in life are at the end of the hard stuff, right?
Yeah.
And you've got to do the tough. Go on, James. Yeah.
But no, I just want to say, because I'm really glad you said it as well, Paul. Sorry, troubling is the fact that the other point, the point is, you're saying is like, it's not like we've all got this figured out. It's kind of like we're all maybe on different sort of parts of that sort of where we are in our sort of professional or coaching journeys and stuff, and trying to help the next person behind us. But it doesn't ever mean that, right, you don't suddenly get to a point and go, well, that's it. I'm done. I've completed personal development. You know what I mean? There isn't such a, exactly. And it's, and when you enable, I think one of my favorite ones, I'm just reflecting on now, and sort of, I'm paraphrasing the quote, but from was it Tony Robbins who mentioned, is like, every sort of worry or thought that you ever had has had by someone else in the history of time.
Definitely.
And as soon as I heard that, I went, because your own thoughts could be very sort of isolating.
Yes.
If you think you're the only one, you go, well, Jesus.
Well, that's a lonely place then.
Very. But and that's why I think what you do is like bring it, especially in a room situation. And then I'm sure there's people in those rooms have gone, well, I think that. Paul's thinking that. I know James is thinking that. And you go, because we're all human.
Well, exactly. I mean, they're astounded sometimes on that point, James, when I say to them, who doesn't have the imposter? I say, I'll use an example. I say last week, I walked into a room of execs, with that little imposter on my shoulder. It always sits on that shoulder for some reason. saying, oh, you won't be able to offer anything to them. Look at all the experience in the room. Now it's quieter than it used to be, but it's still there. But, I think that is a revelation for people. People think that we've got it all sussed, and certainly we haven't. I've certainly learned techniques to quieten things. I mean, the acceptance and commitment therapy was a revelation to me.
Yeah.
I highly recommend that as a pathway for people in learning some of this stuff. I think, so I've got better at it, but it still pops up, and that's fine. I mean, I just say to it now, I've got this, it's okay. I mean, most of the thoughts that we have are there to try and protect us.
Yes.
Their intention is to be our friend, but they just have sort of poor outcomes sometimes, in that they hold us back. And definitely the hardest stuff, that we go through brings the best rewards. It's not just doing it for the sake of it. Why would I? Why would any of us?
Yes.
Embrace discomfort. It's easier to have a life of discomforts and all those, but it won't give you what you want, and it certainly won't build your confidence and self-esteem. Most people say to me they want those things, definitely confidence. Well, the only way you get more confident is by doing scary stuff.
Yes.
There's a great one that I say to people: do something a little bit scary every day, and that can be putting your hand up in that meeting where you wouldn't normally, or speaking to the barista where normally you'd look at your phone. Whatever it is, do something a little bit scary, not panic zone, but just a little bit. It's good for us. It builds our confidence. So,
100%.
So I think some of those things came to mind when you were talking, and just something about the beliefs, James, because that belief, I need to keep everyone happy, was a belief. And because of that, there were some actions that I took to do that, which meant, a lot of work on my shoulders, a lot of stress. So when I'm coaching, and you do this, I know, James, as well, it's about what's the underlying belief and getting people to reflect on their walks. Is this belief still valid? Is that role in my life, the belief that I need to be the perfect mother, for example? Well, what does that mean? That's a belief that's driving some actions. So beliefs, we need to challenge them occasionally. We need to challenge them. And that was a pivotal moment for me. I challenged that belief with help of a really good boss, by the way, who was a coach before we even coined the term coaching.
Yeah.
He got me to
Love
look
it.
differently, and I changed it just slightly. My belief became, I'd like them to be enjoying themselves most of the time, but I recognize that there's going to be discomfort at times as well. So I didn't need to chuck it all out, but I just needed to tame it.
No, love it. Love it.
Gone over our hour, James. I told you.
I was going to say no. Yeah, no, absolutely, Paul. And I was going to say I'm sure we could do another hour as well. It's been absolutely fabulous.
You've got those Labradors to take for a walk anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. I do indeed. Before I let you go, though, I do have one more question for you, Paul, and that is, what's important for your future?
Okay. So I think, at this stage in my life, it's carrying on doing a lot of the stuff that I've talked about. In order to do that, I need to keep myself fit and healthy. So, a lot of my practices and disciplines are around fitness and health. It's hard to do this work, or any work really, without that. So that sort of platform, I want to create sort of more balance in my life, keep sort of saying no to certain stuff so I can say yes to other stuff. I want to get that balance right so I can, have that life with my wife, and as we do, going on holidays and having that, and not just holidays, but just day-to-day stuff. So spending time there. So creating that balance. But certainly, if you think about the question, and the question is what's important for the future, isn't it, James, is the question? Yeah. So carrying on doing this stuff, I don't see myself retiring. In fact, the word retire just kind of conjures up a sort of mirror of negative things. So I think I want to keep adding value to people in their lives. I want to carry on this path. It will probably change to some degree. I think some of the one-to-one coaching may come in a bit more. But I was inspired by a podcast I was listening to this week, where there was an 85-year-old psychologist who sees, 4 or 5 clients every week still, and, he said there, I am now doing my best work. And I stopped on and just thought, wow. So, to carry on doing that, and the only way I can carry on doing that is to certainly look after myself as much as I can. Please God, I get the years, but I need to do the stuff that I can influence there. create some, balance. Sometimes my life has been a bit out of balance. So getting more of that balance, and then just, really just keep modifying and learning and growing in this wonderful space of personal development.
Love it. Love it. As I say, Paul, it's been an absolute pleasure, and I do thank you for joining me. We'll make sure we've got all the where people can
Yeah.
follow you and connect in the
Yeah.
links. But if you want to give a shout out now where people might be able to follow you
Well,
online.
that's very kind of you, James. You know that I'm trying to launch myself onto the world of Instagram, and so you can find me on Instagram at Paul Dicker. It's Paul Dicker _. Now I'm going through the process of trying to just make that Paul Dicker, but anyway, I have someone helping me. I've outsourced that problem, but at the moment,
Yeah.
Paul Dicker _. I'm on LinkedIn. There's not many Paul Dickers on LinkedIn, so that's a place to find me. So I'd welcome anybody that wants to kind of lean into some of the stuff that I've spoken about. I don't have a podcast yet, James, but you kind of inspired me to get going with mine.
Brilliant.
Because you do it so well, and I've loved watching your episodes. And as we were saying, you're up to nearly your 100th, which is fantastic. Fair play to you, James.
Thanks.
So yeah, and I'll put anything else in the
Yeah,
links or whatever.
absolutely.
But
Yeah,
Instagram,
no,
LinkedIn are probably the best bet. I'll be delighted to hear
brilliant.
from people.
Absolutely. As I say, those links to follow and connect with Paul will be in the show notes, everyone. So
Thanks, James.
Thanks again, Paul. Thank you so much again.
No, thank you, James. I mean, the whole exercise and your questions really helped me, same to my wife, Kira, to reflect. And it was a lovely piece to do, both prior to and, of course, always lovely to chat with you, James. And congratulations to yourself on this podcast and all your great work.
Thanks so much, Paul.
Cheers,
Perfect stuff.
guys. See you again
Cheers.
soon.
See you. Thanks for listening to What's Important to You. If you enjoyed this episode, follow or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And if it resonated, share it with someone who might need it too. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment or ask a question, and let's keep the conversation going. I'm James Dean, and I'll be back soon with another real conversation to help you reconnect with what truly matters. Until then, take care and stay curious.